and very profoundly due to your reactions and your questions. I think that starting again from the title that I had given, Citizenship Constructed and Constructed, I should probably organize them or present them around three issues. The first would be what was missing. I will not apologize no more than I did during the class about the fact that I had been working essentially with very traditional notions and texts. After all, somebody had to do it here, perhaps, for others to be able to take you into much more adventurous territory. So I worked with a series, not complete, of course, obviously not complete, of traditional notions which I tried at the same time to trace back to very long and, in a sense, respectable traditions, entrenched in classics and political philosophy, but also to look at from a critical angle and present as open problems or aporias rather than solutions. These were four aspects of the question of citizenship. First, power. Second, corpus or body politic, community, if you like, in its particularly juridical and mystical dimensions. Third, which, owing to my lamentable incapacity to measure time, I had to skip the dualism of the bourgeois and the citizen, and finally the conflictual dimension, or the dimension of consensus, without which I believe, in fact, the very notion of citizenship works against its own pretenses and aims. So after the event, and even taking into account the fact that I should have said more about each of them, and especially the one that I practically left aside, I realized that something important was missing, or perhaps it was there, working under the cover of each and every of the others, but not explicit enough, and that would be the notion of limits, which I take as much as possible in the diversity of its semantic connotations, particularly the spatial one, if you like, the importance of the question of the border, the question of the line that Boaventura so powerfully expressed at the center of his presentations, and also, of course, in its temporal and, in fact, also logical dimension, that is the idea of the end, or the telos, or the final point. So perhaps if this notion had been more explicit, or if I had had, well, first another session to speak about bourgeois and citoyen, but an additional one, which is completely abusive, to add that one. Another dimension of all that could have been more explicit, which again I believe was latent in many respects, but and I do hope that you grasped it in a sense, but which I did not explicitly address, namely the question of the political subject in its double or contradictory relationship to institution on the one sense. I do not entirely share the idea that we live in a post-institutional age, but I certainly believe that each and every of the institutions through which and within which the political has been framed in our societies are today challenged and destabilized. So the political subject as relating to institutions and also as creating or producing capacities to act, agencies, or in the Spinozian terminology, the now very famous and familiar, the question of the conatus, the endeavor or the effort. Behind every discourse on emancipation, there's necessarily a reference to that. And of course, this would probably lead to trying to build a bridge or to establish some sort of conversation with what Esther Leslie just said, and which makes me regret enormously, of course, that I could not find the time to attend her own lecture, because this notion of the subject as instituted on one side and creative on the other side is a very profoundly anthropomorphic or anthropocentric notion. And one of the latent but decisive debates about the nature and the construction or the deconstruction of the political in today's situation, of course, has to do with the validity, the continuity, even the meaningfulness of a purely anthropocentric or anthropomorphic notion. Now, I come from a philosophical tradition that is frequently associated with the French theory of the 60s and 70s, which started with a very strong critique of humanism, and I believe that I remained largely faithful to that inspiration, but I progressively realized that to question and examine again the metaphysics of anthropocentric centrism and anthropomorphism is another philosophical issue for which I personally, at the very least, lack some of the necessary instruments. And I have a feeling that what we've just heard, which strikes me as extremely rich, probably could help us go in that direction. Now, more quickly, the two other reflections that I have, and I will conclude with that in a very aphoretic manner, are the following. First, I take up the challenge that comes from Boaventura, that he repeated today, in fact, and which was very explicit in his